Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You know how sometimes you hear a phrase and it seems like everyone's suddenly talking about it?
Hmm.
Well, that's been happening to me with dual diagnosis.
Yeah,
So I was really glad when you sent over this stack of articles on the link between substance abuse and mental health.
right.
So we're going to untangle this, look at what it means for treatment, and why it's so crucial to understand.
Yeah, what's really fascinating here is that for a long time, these fields were treated very separately.
Oh, interesting.
Someone struggling with addiction went to one type of specialist, someone with, severe depression to another.
Right?
But what we're understanding now is how deeply intertwined these issues can be.
Okay, which is why this dual diagnosis idea is so important. To be clear, we're talking about situations where someone is dealing with both a substance use disorder, like addiction to alcohol, opioids, anything like that,
Uh-huh.
and a mental health disorder, like anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, the list goes on.
Right. And the key shift here is recognizing that addiction is a mental illness.
Oh, wow.
It's not just about willpower or making, different choices. It's literally about changes in how the brain functions.
That classification change feels huge, right?
It is.
Like it removes this layer of personal blame almost.
Right.
But how did we even get to that understanding? It's not like brains come with x-rays showing addiction, clearly.
Right. It's a combination of factors. Brain imaging technology has advanced tremendously, so we can actually see the impact of addiction on neural pathways,
Mhm.
very similar to what we observe in other mental illnesses like, depression.
Yeah.
Plus, long-term studies have shown how genetics and family history play a significant role,
Hmm.
again, mirroring patterns we see in conditions like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia.
So it's not just that someone is making bad choices. Their brain itself might be wired to make those choices more likely.
Exactly. And that's why simply telling someone to just stop rarely works. Imagine having a broken leg and being told to just walk it off.
Mm.
You need targeted treatment.
Right.
And in this case, that means addressing both the addiction and the co-occurring mental health disorder.
Okay, so let's say someone's listening and they're thinking, wait, this sounds familiar.
Right.
What are some red flags that someone might be dealing with a dual diagnosis, either in themselves or someone they love?
Um, it can be tricky because the signs often mimic symptoms of mental health struggles on their own.
Mm-hmm.
Things like sudden mood swings, changes in sleep or eating habits, difficulty concentrating, withdrawing from friends and family,
Okay.
even increased irritability or anger.
Right.
But but here's where it gets even more complex. Those very symptoms are sometimes what leads someone to substance use in the first place.
So it's like a chicken or the egg situation.
Yeah.
Which comes first, the mental health issue or the addiction?
Precisely. It can go both ways, and often it's a bit of both happening in a kind of feedback loop.
Mm.
Someone might be um, predisposed to anxiety, then experience a traumatic event.
Mm.
To cope with the emotional fallout, they might turn to alcohol, which seems to quiet the anxiety at first, but in the long run actually worsens it.
And then they're stuck in this vicious cycle, feeling even worse and potentially using more to numb those feelings.
Right.
It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline, isn't it?
That's a powerful way to put it.
Yeah.
And this is why understanding dual diagnosis is so crucial.
Okay.
If we only treat the addiction without addressing the underlying mental health issues, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a much deeper wound.
Right.
The underlying issues remain, making relapse more likely.
This is all starting to make a lot more sense now. But before we dive into what effective treatment looks like, there's one more thing I'm curious about. Okay.
Well, you mentioned predisposition and genetics.
Mhm.
Let's say someone's family has a history of both addiction and depression, for example.
Mhm.
Does that mean they're doomed to repeat that cycle? Is it inevitable?
That's such an important question, and I'm glad you brought it up because it gets at the heart of how much agency we really have.
Right.
While genetics play a role, they are not destiny.
Okay.
Think of it like this. Having a family history of heart disease might increase your risk, but it doesn't automatically mean you'll have a heart attack.
Right.
You can make lifestyle choices to mitigate that risk.
Yeah, like exercising regularly, eating a
Yeah.
healthy diet, not smoking, those sorts of things.
Exactly. Similarly, understanding your family history of addiction or mental health issues gives you valuable information.
It allows you to be more proactive, to recognize early warning signs, and to seek help sooner rather than later.
So knowledge is power, as they say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The more we understand about dual diagnosis, the better equipped we are to support ourselves and our loved ones.
Right.
And that's what we'll explore further in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned as we unpack different treatment approaches, the importance of an integrated approach, and ultimately the message of hope that surrounds recovery from dual diagnosis.
I don't know about you, but I'm ready to learn more.
Me too.
We'll be back in a flash, so don't go anywhere. All right, so we're back, and I have to say that first part really shifted my perspective on this. It's not just about treating two separate things at once. It's about understanding how deeply intertwined they are, the addiction and the mental health side.
Exactly. And that's why the approach to treatment has to be so different from, what we might have seen in the past.
So walk us through that. What does effective treatment for dual diagnosis actually look like?
Well, first and foremost, it has to be integrated.
Okay.
That means the treatment plan addresses both the substance use disorder and the mental health disorder simultaneously as interconnected aspects of a whole.
Okay, so not just two separate therapy sessions happening on different days, but a more holistic approach.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that treating one without the other is like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Right.
You might make some progress, but you'll never see the full picture.
That makes a lot of sense. So what are some of the specific therapies or approaches that fall under this integrated treatment umbrella?
Um, well, you'll often see a combination of therapies tailored to the individual's needs.
Mm.
One common one is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which helps people identify and change negative thought patterns and behaviors that contribute to both their addiction and their mental health struggles.
So if someone's anxiety is driving them to drink, CBT could help them manage that anxiety in healthier ways, reducing the urge to self-medicate.
Exactly. Another powerful approach is dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, which focuses on building emotional regulation skills and coping mechanisms.
Right.
This is particularly helpful for people who might turn to substances to numb intense emotions, like anger, sadness, or shame.
It sounds like these therapies are giving people the tools they need to deal with life's challenges without relying on substances as a crutch.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And beyond therapy, support groups can be incredibly valuable,
Yeah.
both for the individual in recovery and for their loved ones.
Right.
It's about building a network of support, understanding, and shared experience.
There's that human connection piece again, which we talk about so much on this show. It's amazing how powerful it can be.
Absolutely. And while these therapies and support systems are crucial, sometimes medication might also be part of the treatment plan,
Okay.
especially for managing mental health symptoms.
That makes sense. But I imagine finding the right medication when you're dealing with both addiction and a mental health disorder could be tricky.
You're right. It can be a delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
Some medications used to treat mental health conditions can have
Mhm.
addictive properties themselves, so it's essential to have a psychiatrist who is experienced in treating dual diagnosis and can carefully monitor the individual's response to medication.
It sounds like having a skilled and compassionate treatment team is crucial for navigating these complexities.
Absolutely. And just as important as the specific therapies used is the overall approach.
Okay.
Treatment should be individualized, trauma-informed, and focused on empowering the individual to take ownership of their recovery.
Speaking of trauma, one thing that stood out to me in the research you shared was how often trauma seems to be a factor in dual diagnosis.
Right.
Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely. Trauma, especially early childhood trauma, can have a profound impact on both brain development and mental health. Experiences like abuse, neglect, or witnessing violence can disrupt the brain's stress response system,
Wow.
making it much, much harder to cope with difficult emotions and situations.
So someone who has experienced significant trauma might be more susceptible to both addiction and mental health disorders.
Exactly. And often they might turn to substances as a way to numb the pain of those traumatic memories
Yeah.
or to self-medicate the symptoms of an undiagnosed mental health condition like PTSD.
That makes the need for trauma-informed care even more critical, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Trauma-informed care recognizes the pervasive impact of trauma and seeks to create a safe and supportive environment for healing. It's about empowering the individual, giving them back a sense of control, and helping them understand that their experiences do not define them.
That's such an important message. And it reminds me of something else you mentioned earlier, the role of family and loved ones in the recovery process.
Yes. Family support can be a powerful force in recovery.
Yeah.
Often, family members are on the front lines witnessing the devastating impact of dual diagnosis firsthand.
And I imagine it can be incredibly challenging for them as well.
It is.
They might feel confused, scared, even angry at times.
Absolutely. That's why it's so important for families to have access to support and education as well.
Right.
They need to understand what their loved one is going through, how they can best support them, and how to set healthy boundaries for themselves.
It's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Hmm.
Caregivers need to take care of themselves too, so they can be fully present for their loved ones.
Precisely. And this is where support groups for families can be invaluable.
Right.
It's a space for them to connect with others who understand their struggles, share resources, and offer each other encouragement.
So it sounds like effective treatment for dual diagnosis really requires a multi-pronged approach.
Yes.
We're talking therapy, support groups, medication management, family involvement, and a focus on trauma-informed care.
Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but rather a tapestry woven together from many, many different threads.
And while this might sound daunting, even overwhelming at times, there's one crucial piece we haven't forgotten,
Right.
and that's hope.
Yes. Hope is essential.
Yeah.
Recovery from dual diagnosis is absolutely possible.
In the next part, we'll dive into what that recovery journey can look like, the challenges and triumphs along the way, and the importance of celebrating even the smallest victories.
Yeah. We'll also touch on the concept of comorbidity, which adds another layer of complexity to the picture.
Comorbidity. Now, there's a word I haven't heard before.
Right.
Don't worry, we'll explain all that and more when we return for the final part of our deep dive into dual diagnosis. All right, we're back, and before we get to all the inspiring stuff about recovery, we have to address the elephant in the room, or rather, the mouthful of a word.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned comorbidity earlier,
Right.
and it sounds intense.
It's actually simpler than it sounds. Comorbidity just means having more than one illness at the same time.
Mm.
And this is huge GE in the context of dual diagnosis because it's rarely just two things.
Okay, so it's not just the addiction and the depression, for example. There could be physical health issues in the mix too.
Exactly. Imagine someone, battling opioid addiction. They're also severely depressed.
Right.
But on top of that, they have chronic pain from an old injury.
Oh, wow.
That pain might have been what led to the opioids in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Or someone with schizophrenia might use substances to self-medicate their symptoms, but also have diabetes made worse by those very substances.
It's like those diagrams where everything's connected with strings except it's your actual life.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why treatment has to be holistic.
Yeah.
Ignoring the physical health aspect
Mm-hmm.
while treating the addiction is like, patching one hole in a sinking ship.
Right.
It's all connected.
This is making me think about those times in my own life when, I was super stressed.
Yeah.
My sleep would go haywire. I'd crave junk food. My anxiety would spike.
Mhm.
It's like a domino effect.
Precisely. Our minds and bodies are not separate entities.
Right.
They influence each other constantly.
Yeah.
And this brings us to a really, really important point about recovery. It's not just about abstaining from substances. It's about addressing the whole person.
So what does that actually look like? What does the journey of recovery from dual diagnosis involve?
It's as individual as the people going through it, but there are some common threads.
Yeah.
Therapy remains essential, of course. Equipping people with coping skills, helping them process trauma, and learn healthier ways to manage their mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Support groups provide that sense of community and shared experience,
Right.
which can be so isolating to go through alone.
It's that you're not alone message that seems to come up again and again in these stories, right?
Absolutely. And then there's the lifestyle changes.
Yeah.
Exercise, nutrition, mindfulness, re-engaging in hobbies, rebuilding relationships.
Right.
These might sound small,
Yeah.
but they're huge for rewiring the brain and building a life worth staying sober for.
It's like you're not just treating the addiction or the mental health issue, you're redesigning your entire approach to well-being.
Exactly. And that takes time.
Right.
There will be setbacks, relapses, moments of doubt.
Mhm.
But the key is to keep going, to keep reaching out for support and to celebrate even the smallest victories.
That's what's so inspiring about the stories of of people in recovery.
Hmm.
It's not always linear or easy,
Right.
but that resilience, that determination to keep fighting for their health, it's incredibly powerful.
And those stories are crucial because there's still so much stigma around both addiction and mental health.
Right.
People hesitate to seek help for fear of judgment, of being labeled.
Which is why I'm so glad we're having this conversation today.
You too.
Because knowledge is power, and the more we understand about dual diagnosis, the more compassionate and supportive we can be.
And the more funding and resources we can advocate for.
Absolutely.
Because effective treatment should be accessible to everyone, not just those with privilege.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, if there's one thing you want our listener to walk away with, what would it be?
That there is hope.
Mm.
Recovery is not just possible, it's happening every day.
Yeah.
People are reclaiming their lives, finding joy, and proving that dual diagnosis is not a life sentence.
I love that. It's about shifting the narrative from one of despair to one of empowerment and possibility.
Exactly.
And if you're listening to this and relating to any of it, whether for yourself or someone you love,
Yeah.
please know that you're not alone.
You're not.
There are resources available, people who understand,
Yes.
and a whole community ready to support you on your journey. Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much for diving into this important topic with me today. It's been truly eye-opening.
The pleasure was all mine.
And to all of you listening, thank you for joining us for another deep dive. Remember, every journey starts with a single step. So take care of yourselves, be kind to each other, and we'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration.